Well, the good news is we're over the halfway mark.
Right.
Yeah, so we're making good progress here. So evidence of water boundaries, and like we were kind of saying, definitely want to get input from everybody. We all have different boundaries of water we deal with. I've talked about how I did some surveying in Iowa and Wisconsin. So we had the Mississippi River and learned quite a bit from that one. I was hoping Jerry would be on, could speak to some of that stuff out there.
He's actually on a camping trip this week. He did email me and say he wasn't going to make it this week. So
okay, thanks.
Him and his wife went on a camping trip.
Good for them. And we certainly have a few bodies of water. I was hoping to pull the map up for the actual meander lines for the Great Salt Lake. I had it on my work network, but not on my computer. And I was saying earlier, I did a STEM Fest the last 2 days and just barely made it home to kind of log in and get going. So I don't have that one at the ready. I was hoping to be at work to do this, but so that's something we'll definitely get out and share, because that's an interesting map there. And then as we go through the chapter here, we've got a bunch of different approaches. We could look at the math of determining high water marks and different things, or we could look at court cases that kind of establish and help us reestablish how boundary lines are created along waters, navigable waters, non-navigable waters, what those mean. So I'm looking forward to your guys' input. If there's anything that popped out of you guys want to talk about, we can kind of start there. And maybe we'll put John on the spot just a little bit, and maybe you can just give a rundown of the few bodies of water we have in Utah, and maybe how those were meandered and what that kind of means, at least for us here. And maybe some insight that you have and expertise you have in that one, if I can put you on the spot. And then you're on mute too, John.
He was digging into some stuff.
He was looking for a map.
I was starting to look for some of the stuff I've got, but yeah, I've got a few slides that I can show, and on a couple of issues up around Great Salt Lake, and so yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe while you keep looking for that, let's go through. I think this 8.2 has some great stuff to kind of start chewing on. Determination of public title interests. If you go about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 paragraphs down, it says, thus it may be generally stated. They kind of go through some court cases, and then it says, after the second court case there, it says, thus it may be generally stated that in the United States, with few exceptions, the several states in their sovereign capacity hold the title to the beds under all navigable waters, regardless of whether the waters are tidally affected. The conditions for such title are that the water body must be natural, it must have been considered navigable, it must be considered navigable and in federal ownership at the time of statehood, and of the state in which it is located, and therefore conveyed to the state by virtue of statehood, and it must not have been subsequently conveyed by the state to other parties. And so what it's done is kind of gone through some court cases of how we determine ownership of bodies of water. And then this is kind of the capstone that generally in the United States, the states have the rights to those navigable bodies of water. And so that helps us kind of determine it. And then we look at this chapter of how we kind of determine where those boundary lines end. Most of my experience in any bodies of water are creeks and streams, and most of those deeds call to the center, which create its own kind of unique circumstances, and if that creek moves, then the rights and boundaries to that move with the creek. And that's really the extent of my interaction with riparian rights and boundary, and that for me was the greatest challenge of how do I present this one. And definitely wanted to get some input from anyone else, like I said. So I guess we'll open it up. John, do you find something you could share or want to talk about as far as navigable waters or boundary waters, or kind of open it up to the group and let you kind of search a little bit more?
Yeah, I can. I've got a segment that I discuss with students at SLIC when we're the last session of our last boundary law class as we deal with water boundaries. Had a really interesting case several years ago that trying to get this thing fired up as I talk. But around the Great Salt Lake, of course, is meandered body of water. The Utah Lake is meandered. And there are several other lakes here in Utah that we have that are meandered lakes, the natural lakes. Most of the lakes we have in Utah are reservoirs, not lakes. Man-made reservoirs, man-made dams. Take Bear Lake, for example, it's a combination of the two. It was a natural lake, but then they dammed up a portion of the outflow, and so it raised the level of the lake to an unnatural level. And then the power company actually went in and purchased land out to this new elevation that they projected for the lake, based upon that man-made elevation. So it's kind of interesting because your original patents go to the meander line and or to the high water mark, the natural high water mark. And now we've got this false water mark up above that is an easement essentially that the power company has on the land. And so it's a little bit interesting there. You can actually, when you walk down into the lake, for the most part, you can find the original high water mark because there's an escarpment. High water marks are they're not elevations, they're physical features. So there's a physical feature or that is recognizable when you're there looking at it. There a lot of times, like you mentioned, Connie, the commission, that's the Coastal Commission, looking for using tide marks or tide information to determine the high water mark. Tidal information doesn't determine the high water mark because it's not an elevation. They want to use these tidal measurements to determine what elevation the high water mark is at. That's not how it works. The high water mark is the limit that the water makes, the physical feature. It'll be a driftwood, it'll be some significant escarpment, change in vegetation, those kinds of physical changes that we see out on the ground. That's where you find the high water mark. Now, yeah, you can use tidal elevations to go look and say, where will I most likely find the physical evidence of the high water mark? But the high water mark is that physical feature, not the elevation that you would use as a clue to find it. Here in the Great Salt Lake, for the most part, around the perimeter of the Salt Lake, there are islands that were meandered. There are this upland drops down into the lake, and so there's an escarpment where the high water mark is, where the water most commonly occurs, and or is found. And that's because the lapping of the waves and things like that on a body of water, consistent over time, will erode away the soil and create an escarpment, or some change of vegetation from upland vegetation into vegetation that's in the water or susceptible to flooding. So for the most part around the lake, when it was originally surveyed, it was meandered, and there was a fairly obvious meander line that they were following. Now the meander line is never the boundary. Well, I can't say never. There are exceptions, but the meander line is not the boundary. The high water mark is the boundary. The meander line was an approximation of the high water mark surveyed on the ground is for the sole purpose of determining the acreage of the upland, because you paid your $1.25 for the original patent for the upland. And so it's just a means of determining the acreage of that upland. So it's an approximation of the high water mark, but the meander line is not the boundary. The high water mark is. And the high water mark is, as God knows, will move. And everybody knows, and the court knows that it's a meandering boundary. It changes over time. And so, these, that's why I kind of almost laughed when you mentioned the Coastal Commission going out and trying to determine where the high water mark is. Yeah, today, next year, 10 years from now, no, that's not where it's going to be. It moves. And so to shoot it with LiDAR isn't going to stop it from moving. It's a meanderable line that changes over time and always will. And so any effort to, certainly you can go and you can map it as close and accurately as you possibly can today, and say, yeah, there's your meander line, but 10 years from now, it'll be different. Maybe even a few years from now, it'll be different. These things are very dynamic. Some are more dynamic than others. So it sometimes is an exercise in futility. But in the instance of the Great Salt Lake, as they meandered around the Great Salt Lake, they meandered the entire perimeter of the lake except for the north end of the lake. Because when you get up to the north end of the lake, it opens out into flat land, which was originally Lake Bottom, the original Lake Bonneville here in Salt Lake. Lake Bonneville covered the entire area. Yeah, that's a good one. This is one of the newer resurveys and remonumentation projects that they did just a few years back. 78. But as you get up to the north end of the lake, especially on this little right-hand little branch, and even across the entire north end, it just goes out into flat old lake bottom. And so what we're looking at is a remnant of Lake Bonneville that's located in the bottom of an old ancient lake bed. Up there on that north end, it is so gradual that if the lake rises a foot in elevation, it could inundate a mile or a mile and a half of land, of upland. And so slight variations in that lake level can inundate miles and hundreds of square miles of property can be inundated. So it's incredibly dynamic, and over the years it has fluctuated so much that in elevation there's like I can't recall now, better than 16 feet difference in elevation historically, highs and lows. In the 80s it hit a high, in the 60s it hit a low, an extreme low. Right now it's back down to the record or extreme low level. And you can see on this map that I presume Trent pulled up, you can see that the interior line there, that's the low level of the lake, where the upper line, the exterior line, is the higher level of the lake. These are township squares you're looking at. So you're looking at each one of these is 36 miles square. And you can see there up on that northwest area, the expanse that's covered by the lake, and even down into the southwest. So it's so dynamic that when they surveyed it in the 1850s and the 1860s, there was no high water mark to pin down. It inundates, or it change. Even the wind blowing will move the water over the surface. And so there wasn't a meander line to run. And so you've got this kind of a mixed situation now where you've got some of the boundaries are meandered. When you've got a meandered boundary, the high water, you own up to the patent extends to the high water mark. It's a navigable body of water, so you stop there. If it's a non-navigable body of water, it will be privately owned and you'd own down to the middle of the lake. But it's navigable. And so your ownership goes to, or your patent extends to that high water mark. Well, that works for all the way around the lake, except when you get to the north end, there is no high water mark. And so what the surveyors did is they just kind of went out and extended the section lines out as far as they could and did quarter sections and half quarters and kind of stubbed it out like you were stubbing out against a mountain, and did fractional township surveys. And
I'm not in charge of whether you drink caffeine right now.
and then as they did these fractional surveys, those are non-meandered boundaries. So as the lake receded, well, the government would go out and extend their surveys more. And they did that several times where they extended the surveys as the lake would go down, because you had basically relicted or exposed land that is unsurveyed federal public domain land. And so they kept extending their surveys down until they finally ended up in a lawsuit between the state and the United States government to try and determine, well, where's this meander line, and and where does the state's ownership of the bed of the lake end and the federal government begin? Well, because it's never meandered, then there is no demarcation. There is no high water mark. They're not considered even riparian patents. If you'd allow me to share my screen for a minute, I will give
You're
it a
good to share,
shot.
John.
Okay, like it's available.
Yep.
Let's see, I want to do, let me start this slideshow. I don't want that. Don't want that one. Let me go back down here.
I think this chapter would be just fascinating for case studies, right? All the different case court decisions and that kind of stuff associated with it. Just a whole roundtable discussion on those would go real well with this chapter.
It would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would. Okay, let's share.
Right, while John's sharing that, I just did one around the meander line and to kind of argue what John's saying, not to argue, but in this particular case, the boundary line was the meander line. It actually called out to the meander line, which was interesting.
On,
So there's exceptions
up
to the
on
rule.
the north end of the lake here.
No, on the west, right off the viaduct to go out to Antelope Island. So it was just the north 2 miles of that. Off
Yes,
that
yeah,
viaduct.
Antelope Island area, that was on there, that was meandered. And so you really have to pay real close attention to the original plats to determine what was meandered and what wasn't. This is a plat, and I assume you can see this.
Yeah, you're good.
This is a plat just north of the lake, which is still basically old ancient lake bottom. And there's Bear River comes in, which is this meandered river off here to the left side of the screen. That's the Bear River flows out of Bear Lake, goes north up into Idaho, and then circles and comes back into Utah. And Bear River is a meandered navigable waterway. It was used by the fur trappers when they would trade with the Indians and do their rendezvous. So it was determined to be a navigable waterway. And the one thing that's important about a navigable waterway, to recall or to think about them, is that those were the highways at the time. So when you think waterways and water rights, or not water rights necessarily, but the right of travel on the water and the rights associated with the water and ownership up to the water's edge and that kind of stuff, you're talking about a public highway. And if you think of them in those terms, it kind of helps sort out some of the reasons they have the rules they have. So we got a navigable river. And in this particular township, which is just immediately north of the lake itself, it's probably maybe 3 miles, 4 miles north of where the lake normally would be considered to be. It's probably 15 or 20 miles north of it at the moment. You see this box elder lake that exists over here, and it was a meandered lake. That doesn't even really exist now. If we, this is a blow up, enlargement of a portion of that lake, of the Bear River with its meanders, in this box elder lake. And when you overlay that on an aerial photo, well, here's the Bear River, comes in this way and all the little turns and jogs. And this area right here, just west of I-15, and actually I-15 crosses right through Box Elder Lake. So we have a couple of real good lessons in navigable waters here. The original patents were considered as going to the water's edge here, or to the high water mark of the Bear Lake. And you can see that it's a familiar pattern from there to the pattern you see here. And when we overlay the two patterns, if this will do it, here we go. There you can see the difference between what's on the aerial, and here's an overlay of the Bear River. Look, this stretch up here, this stretch in here, of course, hasn't hardly moved at all. Overlays really well, but here there's a big bend in the river where the original patent, oops, went too far, the original patent cut through here. So government lot 1 has now been completely bisected by the river. And so whoever has a patent for government lot 1 owns both sides of the river. Except that this river, you can actually see the old watermarks as the river has walked its way across. It wasn't a flood event that cut across. Matter of fact, it's almost the opposite. What may have been a flood event that created this cutoff now is this long oxbowed bend. And so you can start seeing how the patent issues really start playing in. This government lot 1, the river now cuts right through the middle of government lot 1. So they've got title to both sides of the river, except because it was a gradual change, government lot 1, the boundary of government lot 1 is really just this portion right here, this peninsula. That's all that's left of government lot 1. The property on the north is government lot 2. Government lot 2 has gained land all the way out to the river, because his patent would follow that river as it gradually moved across over the century. Well, century and a half, yeah, about 150 years. The survey was 1856. So over the last 150 years, this government lot 2 has grown to probably more than double its size, while government lot 1 has shrunk. And so using aerial photography and that kind of stuff is really it really gives you a good feel for what has really happened. This bend here is quite consistent, moved a little bit. You got a town site that was actually established here, town of Bear River City. That the town site has actually, incorporated a portion of what their side has grown. The rest of the river follows pretty close. It's really just this one area up here in government lots 1 and 2 where it's changed significantly. And then we see this area here where we've got a lake, but it's really a non-navigable lake. It was more of a marsh, and it has been dried out and it's been kind of overtaken, but it is all private land. It's because it's non-navigable. So as private land, now, according to the textbook, you would look at this and say, okay, well, this is a round lake. So you do a pie method or a round lake method for dividing the ownership. You could take, the corner between 3 and 4, and you'd find the geocenter of the geographic center of the lake, and you would draw a line from the meander line, or the high water mark between 3 and 4, direct line out to that geographical center point, and then a line back up to the line between lot 4 and 17 and 3 and 8. So you draw like a triangle there, and that would be private land. Except that's not what they did. They went in and just kind of, the stuff here on this section below, they just kind of broke it up like it was part of a section, normal section. And they just included it in their deeds. And so there are deeds today that really have no real root of title in this area. Other than, yeah, they had the rights to it. They owned the lake, but they should have, technically it would have been a pie method to divide it. This is one of those areas you go into and you say, well, yeah, that might have been what they should have done, but this is what they did. And so you go in and now you pull deeds in this area of that lake, and they're all meets and bounds, north, south, east, west, 40s, quarter sections, things like that. And where it's really marshy, they're paying taxes on it, but I don't think they really appreciate it. There is a big cattle, an Angus ranch that kind of runs his cattle on it, but it's not, it's still pretty marshy today. The I-15 corridor cuts right through that lake. There are portions of the lake on the other side that it's pretty marshy ground and not worth a whole lot, so people don't really much care, I guess. As far as the lake itself goes, I think that's the next part that we'll get to. Oh, this is an interesting one. Just south of that same township we were just looking at, this is the Bear River. This is an interesting anomaly here where you've got government lot 1 on the east side, government lots 2 and 3 on the west side. Here's government lot 1 on the east side, 2's on the east side. This would be government lot 7. But there's no government lotting in this big, huge island here where the braided channel has split, or even this island in section 26 and 25, 26. So there's a little island here in 25, 26 that they make it look like they returned the lines through it, but it's not part of the government lots, and so it was never patented, at least. So you have federal ownership of the navigable waterway, which was passed to the state upon statehood. So the state owns the bed of the river, and you've got unsurveyed federal domain land on the islands. And this island is this big one here. That's a considerable size island. There's got to be a couple hundred acres in that thing. But it's unsurveyed federal domain land that was never patented. Because these lots, lot 1, lot 5, lot 4, they go to the east high water mark, and the lots on the other side go to the west high water mark. It's just federal and state land between the two. This is a chart from 1845 all the way up through about, this one only went to 1987, I think, showing the high elevation of the Great Salt Lake and the lower elevations. In 1965 was one of the years that they extended the surveys out and started really stepping on the state's toes, trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, you're surveying our land and now you're offering it for patent. And the patents went to, this is an area where it's within 25 miles of the Continental Railroad that came across. And so all the land within 25 miles on both sides of the railroad, all the odd numbered sections went to the railroad. So as soon as the federal government surveyed this extension, all the odd numbered sections automatically went to the railroad. As soon as they signed the plat, that's an automatic transfer by statute. And the rest of the property they put up for auction, and the duck clubs and stuff went in and bought this property because in the 1920s there was a low spot. Actually, in 1905 it got really low, and a lot of the waterfowl started dying. They would get diseases and stuff as the lake beds would dry up, and so they passed a federal statute that created the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. That was created during these low periods because of the impact it had on the migratory waterfowl. The high water mark, this high water mark here in 1985, that one freaked everybody out. Governor Bangerter at the time, they saw this radical rise in the lake level, and the airport sits about 15 to 17, something like that. So only about 5 more feet and you'd be inundated the airport. So Salt Lake City International Airport. So they started freaking out and went out into the West Desert, dug canal channels out into the West Desert to try and drain lake water out there. But it was, they had to lift the water to get it there. So they put in these big, huge stainless steel pump stations, spent millions of dollars building this pump station. By the time they got the pump station done and fired up, they ran it for a few months, and then the lake level started dropping and left the pumps high and dry. So that's the panic we had there. And right now, the lake level has even dropped further. I had a chart where I extended this, but I don't think it's in this presentation. But now we're back down to the all-time low record, and people are freaking out about, oh gosh, the lake is going to dry up and go away, and never to be seen again. And we've got all these exposed lands now that have what is it, arsenic or something that's in the water or in the soil, and we're all going to die. So there's a panic going on now because it's all low, and somebody's actually even promoted a plan now to try and pump water from the California ocean, the ocean, and pump water over to fill the Great Salt Lake. It's like, come on, calm down, guys. It'll go up again. I mean, I don't think we're in a permanent slump here. Not looking at the history anyway. So it's quite dynamic, though. The amount of changes. This is the survey of the Bear River Refuge. This heavy line, the heavy dashed line, that was the extent of the surveys, the original surveys. And they just went out and just said, okay, we're going to cut it off and stop our survey here. It's not a high water mark. There's no meander line. You can see they had a meander line here in the far north end through these sections in, I guess it'd be 9 north and 3, 4, 5 and 6 west. So there was meanders through a portion of it. They meandered it all the way to the east corner of section 12 in 9 north, 4 west. and then stopped the meander line there. And all of this area down here is non-meandered. You can see where they've now stubbed out sections off to the west, stubbed off all these sections to the south, and they're just extended surveys, still not meandered, no meander line. And it's because it's so flat that there is no high water mark. The water doesn't stay in one place long enough to form any kind of escarpment, and the vegetation that is there is a particular type of vegetation that will grow in the water or out of the water. And so the vegetation doesn't even really change. It's a species that will just grow in those conditions and doesn't change. So if you're surveying in here, yeah, there are patents for all the odd numbered sections went to the railroad. The even numbered sections were all picked up on private patents. And most of those were purchased by duck clubs that are here in the migratory waterfall area. And this again, here you see that island I was speaking of, the federal unsurveyed federal domain land. So that's some of the oddities that are happening there. This is.
Can we pause for just a second, John? I know you're throwing. I appreciate that. I'm just getting sucked in because this is my area, but I just want to make sure we're throwing a lot of vocabulary out too with this, and I just want to take a second and say, making sure that we're all understanding some like escarpment and some of these other terms out there, and just take a break and see, does anyone have any questions about the vocabulary we're using or any of the vocabulary the book use, and see if we can define any terms to help us kind of understand where we're going and what we're talking about.
And then the other one I wanted to throw out there too, John, if you go back your one slide, I looked up the Lake Mead levels at the same time. And one of the lowest points, 1965, matched your bar graph as well for Lake Mead. And then one of the higher points, because I remember right around 85, we were super high as well. And then 99 is when we were almost overflowing the spillways. And so I was curious, it very much mirrored your bar graph here. So I thought that was, so it was a Western drought, obviously during those times. And so
but there are droughts, and they're almost every 36.5 years between high and low, about every 36 and 38 years. You'll see the difference happening from the high points to the low points. And it's just a natural, I attribute it more to sunspots and moon cycles than these long-term weather changes we're seeing.
And then also when you're talking about terminology and stuff like that, we have discussed on Mentoring Mondays when we've had water conversations. The last one we used the book Lake and Rivers, Lake and Boundaries. What is it? Rivers and Lakes and River and Lake Boundaries from Simpsons. Yep. And those books are back in stock on the NSPS website. So you can go to the e-store and pick up that book, which anybody like Chris Klein and anybody who's kind of been on the water side kind of recommends this book. So
so it's fantastic. So it goes into a lot more detail than anybody really needs to know most of it.
Yeah,
he was a wonder.
I'll throw it in the chat for everybody here tonight, and then when I do a follow-up, I'll make sure we hit this book again. So
okay, thanks. Anyone else have any questions vocabulary wise? Anything? I want to make sure we understand. I appreciate John kind of stepping in, filling the time and talk about this. I think this is a great, it even will roll into next chapter when we start talking about history, because knowing the history of the area and some of the stuff kind of helps establish these boundaries. But I want to make sure that we're not kind of talking over someone. We're we all understand what we're hitting.
Yeah, Jonathan here. I'm from the Central Valley of California, and what we've done is a miracle. We've dried up all our lakes and stuff like that. One big one, if you ever look around Corcoran, California is supposed to be 10 feet underwater. they actually were able to take a steamboat, and this blows people's minds in the valley because they were able to take a steamboat from Sacramento all the way down and park it, Tulare, California. And right now that is all ag land, that is all, all this stuff. And so when I was hearing you talking, I've actually turned in a parcel map, and I ran into an old, essentially an old unsurveyed lake parcel, just outside Kingsburg, California. And it was interesting because they do have some monuments located in the unsurveyed portion, right? And it's all divided up into cropland. Essentially, there's two canals that border either side of it. And so when you're talking about that, I'm just, it's just, I mean, everything you're saying is blowing my mind. So if we, if I was to say one thing, is just keep going, because I'm realizing that I need this discussion. And further on, maybe after a drink or two or a rest or two, I might have some questions. Maybe I'll forward them on to Trent for you.
Yeah.
So thanks, John.
That's awesome. Great point. Great points.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Most of the time when that kind of stuff happens, where man goes in and intervenes with the lake, they will purchase the rights to do things. If it's a navigable stream, of course, it's already the state-owned land, so they can dry up the lake, and it's already theirs, and they can patent it out and do whatever they want to. Well, kind of. There are some laws, though, that they have to really work with, because it's not really the state. The state owns it in trust because it's a highway. It's a public highway, and the state owns it in trust, and so they actually have to go through some hoops to disband the public's use as a highway in order to free up the title to be able to convey it. So you'll usually see federal statutes enacted by Congress. They'll go to Congress hat in hand and say, okay, we've got this project and we need to convert this land. And so we need to have a federal act that will take that public trust and remove it from the public trust in order to free it up. This is a survey down around what's called Utah Lake, which exists just, I don't know, what are we talking, maybe 20 miles south of the south end of Great Salt Lake. You've got Great Salt Lake, you've got Salt Lake City, and then south of Salt Lake City, you go around and through a narrow place where the Jordan River connects these two lakes. And Utah Lake. And Utah Lake is a freshwater lake, but it's a big body of water, and it's determined navigable. So the bed of that one is owned by the state as a navigable body of water. And it was meandered like it should have been. And so you'll see these fractional townships up against these meandered bodies, with government lots going to, and the patents issued to the high water mark. And the Utah Lake does have some fluctuation in level, but not as drastic or dramatic as Great Salt Lake, but that does fluctuate. But you look here and you'll see, okay, here's government lot 4 in section 4, going out to where the meander line is. You can see the little dots and dashes where they ran the meander line, and then where they drew the actual high water mark or on the map. So you can find the meander corners, you can connect meander corner to meander corner, you can calculate the acreage of the upland, but typically that I find, unless the meander line isn't the boundary, so it's usually not worthwhile to spend a lot of effort trying to figure out where the meander line was. All you're really looking at is, well, where's the high water mark today? And lot 1 extends to the high water mark, with this natural inundations and relictions of the water. That's what are the terms? You got 2 different kinds of water. You got standing water, lakes, reservoirs, slow moving, at least water. A lake has water moving through it, an inlet and an outlet. Except for the Great Salt Lake, it's no outlet. But you've got a lake, and those are littoral bodies of water where your rivers are riparian, and can't think of a term now. But as a littoral boundaries, you have land that's exposed when the lake relicts or relieves itself. It's called a reliction. So reliction will expose the bed of the lake, and if the reliction is a permanent reliction, drop in elevation with a permanent exposure of land, well, your boundary goes with it right up to the new high water mark. And so that natural reliction of the water will expose land and create land, creates land upland that is now becomes part of your lot, part of your patent. It's automatically included in the patent. Had a case a couple of years ago where they were arguing about, well, who owns this land now that that's been exposed here? Well, no, it's you do. It's automatic. Well, I don't have a deed for it. Well, yeah, you do. Your deed includes it. It's part of it's an appurtenant. It's appurtenant to your property, to your patent, part of your patent, attached to a patent. And likewise, if the lake comes up in elevation and it's going to inundate the land, and you could essentially lose land. As opposed to the actions you see on a river, that's one of erosion, where it takes the soil away and moves the actual channel or high water mark, or erosion and avulsion. Avulsion is where that eroded land is now carried downstream and eventually drops out of the stream. When it slows down, the soil drops out and it builds up a sandbar, or it builds up against the bank, and it becomes alluvion. So there's a lot of weird terms with, related to the two, but there's two different kinds of terminologies, one for lakes and one for rivers.
So John, with the lakes, the book talks about tidal and non-tidal waters. Is that kind of what you're getting at with the reliction of a lake?
The ocean is considered a lake, but it has the uniqueness of this tidal action. The tidal action only inundates land and exposes land. It doesn't change boundaries. It's not a boundary. It has no effect on the boundaries themselves. What changes the boundary is that movement of the water may move the high water mark over time, but the high water mark is the boundary. Think of, say, a river. Back east, they're real common. You got a river that goes out into the ocean. Well, the tide water rises, the tides come up, and the water comes into that channel, the river channel, and becomes tideland. But there's no change in ownership when that happens. Then as the tide goes out, well, it re-exposes the land that was already there. And they have your ownership will go to that high water mark, wherever it is, and the land that's exposed below the high water mark, well, maybe public land like clamming beds and such. There's all sorts of real intricacies that can happen there, and I don't know if we want to get that deep into it. But you could have clamming beds, like Massachusetts, for instance, has a law that says, well, the first 100 rods of exposed land, that belongs to the upland. That's their clam. Those are private clamming beds. Anything beyond that is public. So if there's more than 100 rods of exposed land, well, the public can go out there and gather clams in those areas because it's public land, part of the navigable waterway. So yeah, you have rivers that are affected by tides, and then you have the tides of the regular ocean shore, the beach, that's affected by tide as well. But again, that's just high tide's going to inundate more land than normal tide will. You'll see these if you walk along the beach and look at the upland and just look for the physical markings, the escarpments, which is a change in elevation. Usually you'll see drift lines, they call them, where the driftwood will actually stack up and kind of line itself up. That's kind of an indication of how far the water normally goes. It may get inundated more than that for a time, but it's not enough to move all that stuff out of the way. You've got your high tides, low tides, mean tides, mean high, mean low, high, 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 low, high. There's all these different tidal elevations that happen, but not to be confused with boundary law, which is, no, where's the high water mark? And some places the low water mark is the boundary. Like in the Massachusetts example, they don't go to the high water mark, they go to the low water mark, which includes those clamming beds. The low water mark is the area, there's another escarpment there because below the low water mark is the normal place where the river is, where the bed of the stream is. And so from the low water mark to the high water mark, that land is included with the upland. But different areas of different jurisdictions, they all have little nuances like that. Simpson's book goes into great detail about those different areas. This Utah Lake thing, there was this case in 1894 on Utah Lake because they had gone in and meandered the boundary of the lake, and then later on came back. Let's see if I can figure this out. It's been a while since I looked at this slide again. Okay, there's the original survey. And here is section 4. Right here, there's an airport just south of section 4. Here's the lake. And all of this land here, you got the Provo River flowing in. And if you compare this slide with this section 4, here's section 4 in the original meander. Government lot 4, 3, 2, and this little sliver for 1. Well, that's clear back here. The sliver for lot 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Yeah, it's all they're clear back here, and the lake was clear back there. As the lake receded in this lower elevations, it exposed all this land. And of course, the river still runs to the lake. But all this exposed land, this particular case was a guy was running his cattle out there and grazing this exposed land. And the upland owner of one of these government lots was saying, no, that's my land. And they, no, you can't, it can't be your land. You're clear back there, you know. And this is a half a mile or 3/4 of a mile away from there. Matter of fact, if you really looked at it, it'd probably be in section 5, if there was one, but there isn't. So all of this land, and then where they built the airport, is all on fill. So they created this man-made fill area for that, and really kind of changed the old meander lines considerably. So here's an aerial photo with the river in it. There's the airport, same thing. Here's the ownership map. Let's see where we at. It doesn't even, yeah, this line right here, I think was the old meander line. Clear back here, a piece of it. But now they got parcels of land out there that may or may not have a root of title, a good solid root of title. Some do, some don't. Some of them, you know, had they been these government lots projected out to the new meander lines, yeah, that would work. But there's new meanders, old meanders, quite a bit of change that's occurred in these areas. Okay, there's the airport. but it's, yeah, here's the meander line, shown here on a dashed line. That's the meander line. Here's section 33, I think it is, or whatever that was. No, section 10. See the meander line is clear back here in the corner of section 10. And I guess, no, in corner of section 9. Part of this up here was a government patents, but all of the land below this original meander line is all relicted land and been filled upon and kind of by man.
So we do have a question here. Zambrana, you have a question to ask?
Yes, Mr. Stahl. I would like to know, because I've never been on the field, just like the experience. And first of all, I can hear you all afternoon talking about this, because this is something that I'm studying to pass my test. So thank you. The meander monumentation. I know that this is not these are not monuments. This is just for reference, just to calculate area of where the true boundary is, which is the high water mark or the low water mark.
Mhm.
These original meander corners, do you protect them? Do you use them? Is it the responsibility as a surveyor to protect this type of monumentation, or once the meander changes, you just remove and change with the
Great
new
question. Great question. The meander corners are considered an original government monument, just like the quarter corners and section corners. And you'll see here, like on this one here where section 9 is, they've extended the section line, the north line of 9, and it's the south line of section 1. No, section 4. They've extended that out and they put this dot right there, and there'll be a little MC on the plat if you look real careful, if you could. There's a little MC for meander corner, and they give you the distance to that meander corner. And so likewise, where they stubbed the line to the south between 9 and 10, they hit the high water mark, they set a meander corner. So they are physical monuments, and they do control the direction of the line. When the lake recedes, the question then is, okay, what portions of this land belong to that government lot? And that's where you start getting into the different methods of breaking down that the new land that becomes exposed, and trying to determine where the actual boundary is between, say, government lot 1 and government lot 2. That'd be a 16th line coming across here, probably parallel with the north line, because that's all you get to work with. You'd probably stub it out from some corner here that's over 30 chains. So yeah, you'd probably stub it out here as a 16th line parallel with the north line, and say, okay, here's where I intersect the meander line. And so you have to be able to recreate where the meander line is to figure out where this meander corner would be on the meander line. Or you can even take it as far as the high water mark. Goes both ways. So you could take it to the high water mark, but as the lake now recedes from that high water mark, you've got to figure out, well, what direction does the line take? It's typically not believed to be an extension of the line, typically, but you'll find lots of cases where they do extend the line, and say extend the section line out into the lake, or extend this line out. But technically, it's a line that goes to the median line in the lake. I'd have to go back several slides here. I've actually got a slide that kind of shows this. See if I can figure out how to find it quickly. This one. Yeah, here it is.
One of the comments in the chat, Paul had to jump off, but he's an attorney and land surveyor in California, and he jumped off, but he just threw in the chat, great discussion, have to jump off. My only comment is to make sure that you check your individual state and cases for variations and interpretations, right? That the big disclaimer that we would probably talk about in the beginning, but California, for example, has quite a few nuances that I've never even seen in Oregon or Washington. So
Yep, and every state has some
Yeah.
little weird things that they'll throw at you, little anomalies.
yeah,
This is a typical way to divide up the ownership of a lake as it recedes. Say this lake dried up. Well, and somebody owned government lot 4. They would you have a meander corner here on this corner of lot 4. The direction of the meander line goes to this median line, and it can be sometimes it's 90 degrees to the high water mark. Sometimes it's 90 degrees to the median line. And sometimes there are several solutions to which point on the median line do you want to go to. And so it becomes really kind of interesting how the different types of ways to divide these lands up. And there's no real simple answer other than be careful with your jurisdiction, what cases are going on, and see how they've treated some of these things in the past. Bottom line is really hope that somebody's already gone in and done it once for you, because then whatever they did, you just repeat it and keep building on that prior survey, because there are so many different ways to do it. It's really almost hard to say any one particular way is wrong. If somebody chose to do it one way, I would say, yeah, do it that way, retrace what they did, because you can't really say that it's wrong. It's a valid method. You have perpendicular methods and you have proportionate methods. Proportionate methods would use the frontage of along the high water mark, the frontage of the government lot, and then give you a proportionate amount of frontage on the median line. Lots of different ways to do it. Proportional methods and a perpendicular method is preferred. A proportional method would probably be second choice, and then proportional area method, third choice. That would look at the acreage of the upland as opposed, so that government lot 2 gets a bigger piece than government lot 1. See, that's a pie method that they chose to do here doesn't work. If you're looking at acreage, somebody who bought more acreage should have more acreage, should gain more acreage. And, there are all those kinds of real weird little laws and different ways of looking at them. You take a river, rivers. Now this is 2 examples: proportionate method, proportionate frontage method. Which gives them the length of the high water mark on the original patent, as opposed to the length of along the median line, and determines the direction of the sidelines based on that. But you always have to have a beginning point and an ending point. Here they've dropped a perpendicular method for lot 5, perpendicular method to cut it off at lot 4, and now you've got a length of the entire length of the meander. Whoops. To where it cuts off down here. So you've got entire from this cutoff to the other cutoff, entire length versus the length of the meanders here, and then you can set up a proportion, and it gets pretty extensive. Quite an extensive analysis to figure out, well, what's the direction of this line? And the perpendicular method is always a simpler one. You can look at it as individual lots. You don't have to look at the overall length of the property. You can break it down to individual lots, and it usually works best because as you're standing at the shore, looking at the lake or looking at the center of the river, and you want to build a boat dock on your property up against your boundary, it's going to pretty much be perpendicular to where you're looking at the river. So it's more of a natural line, and that's why it's preferred. Perpendicular method usually works the best. So yeah, those are some of the ways to do it, but yeah, those meander corners, they mean something. They are original monuments, just as valid as the quarter corners and section corners. There is a monument there that can be recovered. Most of the time, they were just posts, wooden posts that were marked up, but you can basically retrace and reconstruct those positions, and then work from there. So that was a long answer for a short question, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there's much else to show here. Let's see, this one here, and we looked at that, where the current parcels are today, as opposed to where those meander lines were. Here's an interesting one where the meander line, the original meander line, there's property that's been inundated. And whoever owned patents for government lots, probably 2 and 3 in here, don't even have any land left anymore. Their land has been completely taken away and inundated by the lake and is gone. No more patent. God took it away, and God made this land up here riparian. So now this land has been converted from a normal section. It now has a high water mark and is now riparian. Even though he's got a patent that it would end at the section line, it's now been converted to a riparian patent. And so if the lake was to recede, the upland owner from this adjoining section would actually, their boundary, it would become part of their property. So anything that would be, it's not like the original patentee gets, resurrected. No, it becomes new land, and it's now attached to the upland here. So you get some really interesting cases, things that happen with those, where they've been completely inundated and wiped out of the original patent, and now somebody else has now taken those riparian rights, have now been exchanged or to another, attached to another property. And here, just down from the lake, we see a peninsula that has been extended out and formed. Whether that's natural or man-made, I don't know. But whoever held the patents for the government lots up against that meander line, their ownership extends right out with it. And you would normally go perpendicular method, but a lot of times you'll see where they'll just extend their lines. And you won't find that in the textbooks, but that's usually what you'll find. They just treat it like, well, it's just more of the section, or bigger section now. Oh, I was going to show you one thing with this. It's a kind of a side note. With this one up at Bear Lake. Going back and forth here between, these two overlays here. This particular shot, I kind of just made the thing transparent. So you can see here's the river and how it matches, and here's the new bend. Notice the section lines. Northeast corner of this section, northwest corner section 8, northeast corner of section 7. That's where the section corner was originally. Today it's down here in this intersection of these roads right here. And all these section lines run up to the river here. And see, here's this section line, got a road running right up to where the river is down in here. The section corner is up here. Well, no, it's down here today. There's county monuments in the roads down here. Basically what happened was all these monuments were very lousy monuments that were torn out or lost as the settlers came in and settled over top of them. And the county surveyor went in and recreated them. And when he did that, he ended up down here with his measurements and set new monuments. Everybody occupied according to the county surveyor's monuments from the late 1800s when this happened, probably within 40 years of the original survey. But then you jump across the river, on the other side of the river, the roads go right down the old section lines. So there's an offset now from the west side of the river here. All the section lines are in line with the original surveys. Can't really quite see them because there's not many left here, but you can really see it here off to the west, where these section lines and roads are they all line up with the original section survey line. But over here on the east side, no, it's clear down here. So there's a big, probably a 350, 400 foot offset between the one side of the river and the other.
Holy moly.
And you just don't go there. You
I
know?
was just going to say, how many court cases in that area?
None.
Oh my goodness.
No, none.
Okay.
You just don't go there. This is just the way it is. It happens, and you can't kick the sleepy dog. I mean, it would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Certain things you just can't fix.
Wow.
You just don't deal with them. You just accept the status quo, which is, yeah, you got county surveyor monuments over here that all work, and you got county surveyor monuments over here that work, and you got a 3-degree bearing on the north line of section 1 over here on this township.
Hence the reason to network with local surveyors.
Yeah,
Your
well,
state surveyors, so you understand local knowledge.
and the manual refers to them as local corners.
Sure. Sure.
You know, the corners of common report, and that's what they become. They become controlling monuments for all the surveys that happened and the occupation, and
Right.
you just take it as it is. You don't upset the sleeping dog.
I think that's kind of a great little introduction for next time's chapter, historic. And I was going to throw some homework out there, try and get you guys involved, and find some example like this to share that you wouldn't know that unless you knew that particular area. Again, this area that John's talking about, that's kind of in my service area. I haven't done a lot out here, so I didn't know that. I mean, this is 20 minutes from my house. I pass this at least monthly. I know right where we're looking at here, but I didn't know that history. And so if I had to go out there and survey, granted, I'd find the county surveyor's records and I'd follow it, and I probably won't ever even know that happened, but how great is it to know some of that history that's there? Now, this part I don't know, but a lot of it, and I've talked about, particularly in Utah, the difference between the original Mormon lot and blocks and the section corners, and that history is more well known, but someone from back east comes out and surveys out here, and all the section corners are literally in the middle of someone's house, and you're trying to recreate section corners, and a lot of them don't have witness corners. How are you doing that? You have to know that local knowledge. So I think that's a great little homework for everybody. Come up with some story we can share in 2 weeks of some little quirk, some historic quirk in your area that we can kind of talk about and use as some discussion points.
Yeah, I did say there weren't any lawsuits up here, but there is a lawsuit that went on for several years that I was involved in, and it involved criminal case, civil case, lawsuit against the county surveyor, Doppel investigations, grand jury hearings, 2 grand jury hearings, and we finally got a settlement. It was close to $1 million. And that was in the section here just to the west, section 3. It ended up involving every landowner in the entire section and just basically fixed all of their boundaries. And it was over all cause because the county surveyor went in and tried to remonument the section where he thought they should be without understanding what was going on, and messed up a whole bunch of boundaries. And there was some forgery involved. It was a really nutty case. But yeah, that was just right there in the area, just west of the river.
Wow.
Well, John, I appreciate you jumping in and spending that time talking. You explained this better than I ever could have, having read through the book a couple of times. So I am very grateful for your help tonight.
Absolutely.
For stepping up and doing that. I really don't have anything to add. I think he hit all my bullet points that I had for the chapter in the book. They do have some diagrams of some of the vocabulary terms and the mathematics that we talked about the meander lines and the methods of creating those, the perpendicular meanders and all that type of stuff. So that's something you guys can go through if you haven't already. Kind of just now you know the principles behind what the book is trying to explain.
Hopefully it'll make a little sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions about this chapter or what was talked about tonight? Anything we can help clear up so we don't leave anyone with doubts or confusion about this? This is definitely one of those, if you don't do it often, you don't have it. Zambrano, you have another question? Go for it.
Yes, quick question. The dash lines on the townships and some of the lots, is that a way to say that this was never put on the field?
Yeah, they were the meander lines that were run, and on the township plats, when they run a meander line over on the right hand side of the township plat, you'll see a meander table, and it has all the courses and distances of each one of those set line segments that are dashed on the plat. Each one of those line segments that they actually ran those lines and measured that meander line, and you'll find the bearing and distance of each segment from meander corner to meander corner. And there is a method in the manual called the broken back method to calculate between those two meander corners. You go out and field locate each meander corner physically on the ground, and then you've got a record according to the meander table, a record of all the measurements, and then you can, there's the meander table on that one, and it gives you the meander lines for each section, and then you can calculate that meander line. Like section 29 there has several courses. They're all in chains, and you can calculate the how many, where they ran that, and then you've got a record and measured compare it to in a formula through the broken back method to determine how to adjust those corners to determine the meander line. There are a few examples where, like in this one, where we had this dry lake, where I was talking about the dry lake that was there. It was meandered body. Nobody ever paid their $1.25 for a patent on that in that dry lake because it was considered, inundated land. But because they're riparian, it's a private ownership, and as the lake dried up, they extend out to it. You could calculate those meander lines and the meander corners to confirm the area and figure out where the meander corner would have been, because the high water mark is completely obliterated now in agricultural land. So you have to put it back mathematically using those formulas and using the field notes to tell you where the meander corners were and such.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks, Trent, for putting this on.
No, thanks, John, for tonight. That was awesome.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you for putting it on. And yeah, I never encountered water boundaries except for an occasional high water mark or mean high tide line. So completely out of my expertise.
The one, there was a couple of things. One, next week I think I'm at like 27 years and I've never heard the word highways as a term for, like our original highways, right? As the navigable waters. And so I love that one. And then you talked about like driftwood being part of like a meandering line or your high water marks and
Drift
stuff.
line,
Yeah, drift lines, and that kind of stuff. So I thought that was where all kind of the debris along the shorelines that kind of cause that. So usually you're looking for that white, crusty line basically, but talking about the, kind of the drifting material.
Even sometimes just a few inches. If it's real sandy soil, you'll see this escarpment that's just a few inches of drop or half a foot of drop. Really subtle sometimes. Other times they're just totally obvious. It's a an embankment, you know?
Sure. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
those are a couple that jumped out to me tonight. I loved it. Again, not Nevada, we don't have a lot of water either, right? We just have Colorado and then kind of Tahoe or whatever. But so not my expertise is not water either, but those are a couple of highlights I thought really jumped out.
I did an engineering survey where I walked with the county flood control, so it was just like a site plan for a new house, right? They have a flood control kind of channel that goes through there, and it had rained like 2 days before that, and I literally walked her trying to determine the high water mark for placing the house. And he literally, it was dry as a bone at that point, but we literally looked for where there was trash and leaves and branches and any evidence of where in that recent rainstorm the water had risen to the highest point of that, where it got caught in roots and other things. We literally shooting trash to determine that high water mark.
Yeah, vegetation changes are a real good key factor too, because as the water rises and lowers, it inundates the vegetation, and only some certain types of vegetation can survive being flooded. Then as the water recedes, then those types of vegetation can grow in both conditions and will survive the being flooded and will maintain themselves. And so you'll see this change of, you've got this one type of grass, and then all of a sudden you'll have swamp grass, and now this is upland grass. And you can tell a lot of times the difference. They're just physical demarcations that you have to look for. And it's change of vegetation, escarpments, it's drift lines, it's things like that, those physical things.
Yeah.
Because boundaries are physical objects. They're not invisible. They're not some mathematical determination. They're not determined by an elevation. They're determined by physical objects.
That's awesome. Oh, I appreciate it. That was awesome. Great discussion.
Sure.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else got anything else? Anybody else chime in? All right.
I've got another presentation that really goes into the history of the elevations on the lake and looks at the actual, there was a survey done in 1848. It was actually an expedition, the Gunnison expedition to the Great Salt Lake. And they named all the islands on the lake. They were the first white men to actually circumnavigate the Great Salt Lake. And they went clear out to Pilot's Peak across the salt flats on the West Desert. I can't imagine how they survived. And they almost didn't. It's just crazy the stuff that they did in there, the journals that they have, and the results of their survey are astounding. So the equipment they had, stuff they were up against.
We'll need to get you to present that to a chapter meeting or something. That would be a cool one to see. I want to do it for Utah, and maybe John, you and I ought to get together one time. But when I was in Wisconsin, they did a history of the establishment of the counties, and they went year by year of, sometimes the county was down in the southwest corner and it was named like York County, and then all of a sudden it was moved to the very north point of the state, and it's like, how does that county name move all the way up there, and the shapes and eras and how they established it was really interesting. I've always wanted to do that for Utah.
Yeah, I've actually got a set of KMZ files that walk through the county history in Utah, which actually included Nevada originally. Utah extended all the way, the Utah territory extended originally all the way to California, to California boundaries, and included all of Nevada.
That wasn't until they found silver in Nevada, and they didn't want the Mormons to have the silver, so Nevada quickly got taken out.
Then they created a territory there for Nevada real quick.
That's funny.
But it is interesting because I was doing some title research on a case that I had to go into Nevada to get the information because it had been moved to a county in Nevada. The property was in Nevada, but it was Utah land originally.
We got a similar situation here as well, like in Las Vegas Valley, where, old records, depending on when they were created, could be in the old Lincoln County recorders versus, like Clark County from 1905 or whatever. So,
Mhm.
yeah, depending on the time of the history, depends on what county it was at the time at the survey.
Yeah,
So,
at the time,
yeah, it's pretty cool. Awesome, guys. Well, have a good night, everybody. Good rest
Yep.
of the week.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks.
Bye, guys. Thanks, John.
Bye.
Good night.